be recording today's session. All right, I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar, Starting a Specialty Food Business. I am Kim Rush Lynch, and I'm the Ag Marketing Specialist with University of Maryland Extension in Prince George's County, and I will be facilitating this session. Throughout the presentation, we will be using the chat pod for questions. That's on the lower right side of your screen. Please use the arrow key to select all participants or everyone and type your question in, and the presenter will be able to answer your question as soon as they are able. Before we begin, I would like to thank our sponsors and collaborators listed on the right hand of the slide. Please check them out. And I also want to remind you of some of our upcoming webinars. Next up, we have resources for new and beginning farmers, food safety, and urban soil quality. As a reminder, our presentation will be recorded today. An email will be sent directly to you with the link to the archived presentation and any materials presented. Please feel free to share this email with your colleagues. Our complete collection of archived webinars can be found on our website at the address listed in blue. And now, I would like to turn the presentation over to Ginger Myers with University of Maryland Extension, our Ag Marketing Specialist and Director of the Maryland Rural Enterprise Development Center. All right, Ginger, please take it away.
Thank you, Kim. Welcome all to this Wednesday webinar with Women in Ag series, Starting a Specialty Food Business in Maryland. Kim was gracious enough to give my introduction of my position. I want to spend just a second or two on this beginning slide here because while the picture may be small on the top of this slide, those are 4 bottles of a type of hot sauce called Huckles. And they exemplify the type of small specialty food business we're going to talk about today. Huckles is a hot sauce company founded by 2 young gentlemen in East Baltimore who had the idea of gleaning from the urban gardens in Baltimore, the peppers and onions and tomatoes, to start a hot sauce business. Started small, they are now looking for commercial kitchen space, they have restaurants and retail sales. So they exemplify the type of businesses and that we're talking about, and also they have a great story, which is also really good news. My pedigree comes up next here a little bit. As Kim said, I am the Marketing Specialist for Ag and Natural Resources with the University of Maryland Extension and the Director of the Maryland Rural Enterprise Development Center. I've worked for a long time with small business, agribusiness, and developing direct marketing enterprises such as farmers markets, market stands, CSAs, and particularly small business entrepreneurship. And in recent years, much more work done in specialty foods and food processing on all levels. My husband and I also have a grass-based livestock farm just outside Westminster, Maryland, and we direct market our meats, so I'm familiar with many of the regulations. We have some value-added products made, so again, I've been through some of those hurdles as well, and successes and train wrecks that I'll share with you today. So that's a little my background, and I would like to know a little bit about who I'm speaking with. So I would like to know if you already have a specialty food business or not. And we can do a little poll where you get to participate. If you look over under the attendees list, there's a bar of tools, some on the left where you'll see the hand raised, but we really want to turn your eyes to the right where there's 4 icons, and the first one is a little check in a box. If you open that, you can vote yes or no if you already have a business, so I can kind of get a feel for who we're talking with today. So if you'll just take a second and do that. I'm seeing some red arrows start up, and that's great because you're kind of exploring here today, and some with none, so you may be on here just listening, and that's great too. So it's good to know who we're speaking with. I wanted to let you know that the presentation actually sort of breaks into 2 parts. The first being looking at whether a specialty food business is really for you. You know, it's one thing to love to bake pies. It's another thing to bake the pies and run the shop and do a business. So we're going to talk a little bit about whether you're really a food entrepreneur. And then the second half of the presentation, we're going to walk through many of the steps involved in launching a business, particularly a food business in Maryland. And I will say that for those who may be on from out of state, I'm going to be referencing food regulations in Maryland. You'll need to check in your home state if you're working somewhere different, or if you're planning to market in a different location than Maryland, there may be some regs you'll need to check on.
Before you move on, we have someone with a question. I just wanted to remind folks that to ask questions, they need to type in the chat box, and Ginger will be taking a pause in her presentation and will be able to answer them for you. So thank you, Lisa, for typing your question in the chat box.
Okay, as I said, we are going to kind of break the presentation in two pieces, looking at entrepreneurship first, and then I'll take a look at those questions and see if some of them are related to something later in the presentation. But we'll be sure to get all your questions answered along the way here. So, you know, when we're talking about specialty foods, what are those exactly? You know, you may have a product that was on your grandmother's recipe, and that could be either cultural origin or ethnic, or perhaps you're looking for a specific process. Getting a lot of calls these days for gluten-free kitchens, looking for a product that's a different process. Maybe you're looking for seasonal things that are limited supply, or even the packaging. And an example of that, I worked with a cheese producer who, while cheese in itself, farmstead cheese, is a specialty product, they were making cheese sticks in a package where they were putting a pencil sharpener on the end of the stick so that you could kind of grate the cheese onto your salad or your burger. And so while cheese in itself was a specialty, they were using a unique package and a unique use of their product as one of their sales points. And by virtue of being somewhat different, the products have to be perceived as having a higher value. They are a niche or unique product, and do need to command a premium price, because oftentimes these are small batch, hand-done items. And so we are looking at something that you need to get your pricing worked out on as we start to develop product. So some things to consider, you know, back to are you a food entrepreneur? Are you interested in starting a business? Lots of times we become passionate about something and decide we're going to pursue that as a business pursuit or a profession, and got to make sure that you're willing to do the business side, doing the market research, pursuing the regulations in great detail, and devoting the time to do market research. You know, are you someone who's willing to look at what it takes to be in that business? Or do you just really like making the product? And if you really just like making the product, the decision for you may be to work in the industry with someone else. And either way, it's a good decision if you look at all the inputs that are needed. It can take some time. I've worked with folks, some folks making ice cream now that started 2 years ago in their plans of whether their dairy was going to make ice cream or not. It's at least a couple of months as you do your research and develop product. And so are you in it for the long haul to develop a business? The other thing we need to take a look at is who will purchase your product. Often I get comments from folks who say, everybody loves my chocolate chip cookies. I know I could be the next Mrs. Fields. Or I've made this beet relish from my grandma's recipe and they just love it. Well, your families and friends will tell you that they love it, but really, who is your customer? Have you taken the time to look at who would buy your product, how often, what they spend for these kinds of products, and where do they purchase them? Where would be an outlet? You will truly be the chief cook and bottle washer in this operation, literally. So to take on that kind of commitment, we need to see who's going to purchase your product. And I ask folks to tell me who their first and best customer is. Who is that person? And why would they take money out of their pocket and put it in yours for this product? So think about that, and particularly when we start to do product development, what is it? Who is that customer that you're designing this product for? Because people buy things to satisfy a want or a need, not just because it's unique. They're looking for something when they go shopping. So what is that need that your customers are looking for that you can fulfill? Of course, what is your product and how are you going to make it? In Maryland, there are very few exceptions with being able to make food products in your home. We do have a Cottage Food Law in Maryland, and you can look for more information on that on some of the websites. They do detail a pretty limited number of products. They are what are called non-hazardous foods that have a low moisture and a stable pH. And again, if you're questioning that lingo I'm using there, you need to be a food entrepreneur, a foodie that looks into what are the definitions of certain types of food. So if you can't make it in your home kitchen, then are we looking at renting facilities or building facilities, or even having a co-packer, and that's someone who makes the product for you, involved? So that's a big question. Again, if you're baking wonderful chocolate chip cookies, it's one thing to make, 14 dozen. It's another thing if you have orders for 114 dozen. So how will you make that product and where? Oops, sorry, fingers too fast. I spoke briefly about the local, state, and federal regulations in food processing. In this country, we're very fortunate we have very safe food. And in part, it is due to some of the requirements for food safety. For those starting businesses that, again, look at doing something in their home or doing something on their farm, you need to be aware of the zoning ordinances in your land, whether it's a permitted use even. And you can find out through your county planning office. You'll certainly need to seek out some food safety training. Again, there are very few products that you'll make that you won't have what we call a standard operating procedures, where you'll have your recipe step through how it's made, and it will be written. And you certainly need to comply with all the regulations for food and drug, or whatever your product falls under. Is it an acidified food? Is it shelf stable? It's all that lingo, again, where you need to do your homework of looking at the process and the regulations that are involved. And again, I often get a lot of questions about, do I have to do this and do I have to do that? Again, these regulations are in place for a reason, to comply with food safety. We certainly don't want to make anyone ill. And it is not a situation where you can ask for forgiveness later that you didn't know, because you will be liable. And everybody's hunky-dory till someone ends up in the emergency room with some kind of food-based illness. Testing laboratories, you're going to have to find out how you get your product labeled, tested, and all those kinds of things. Again, it's not that it can't be done. We have lots of resources to help you with this, but realize this is an important part. And again, as a food entrepreneur, as a business owner, this will fall to you to take care of. Of course, the big question, can you make money with this enterprise? Well, oftentimes food entrepreneurs I run into are very enthusiastic about their product, and you certainly need to be your own best cheerleader. But at some point, we have to determine the size and financial inputs and returns that are going to come from this enterprise if you're going to sustain it over time. It will go back to, what are your goals for this business? Oftentimes, it's what we look at is we call income patching, where on a farm, for instance, they may be making cheese with part of their milk that's part of their income, selling the rest. Or perhaps if you have a large garden that you're putting some things through the farmer's market and you're processing the rest. It's often, you're going to have to think of this as a patch and not total income. So you work through this. So again, you have to look at how much time and financial resources are you willing to commit, and what is we talk here about how much will your customers pay for your product, but the real question is, what is your profit margin? How much will you actually net out of this? And so I always tell folks that when you're getting into this, don't quit your day job. It's very difficult to jump up from zero to a full income when you're starting a specialty food business, and oftentimes you're working evenings and weekends, and it's part of that sweat equity that you're going to put in, that all small businesses put in, to learn their trade and to turn out a quality product. So that being said, do you have the necessary capital to invest? And lots of folks say, I want to start small, and that's fine. But even some of the license and trainings that you're going to need as you do that market research are going to cost, $50, $100, whatever. So you are going to need some resources to get started. A lot of what you're going to do in the beginning is your own ingenuity and labor and research of going out and checking other products, buying other people's items, going to food shows, farmers markets, anywhere where your type of product is looking for might be sold. The Internet's made it very easy to go out and look at other items for suggestions and ideas and prices. But again, when you make the leap into putting in time, perhaps buying glass jars or having lab testing done, we're talking about some investment in startup cost. Now, I have a quote there from the From Kitchen to Market, Stephen Hall's book, where he's saying $35,000 to $100,000, which is a pretty big investment. But if you look at some of the things going on in Maryland now with the distillers and the brewers, markets that are going on, these gentlemen and ladies have invested that and then some to start that specialty product. And again, if you talk to some other folks who have products out there like you want to produce, and if we talk to them in honest numbers, they've got some investment in there. However, I will caution you against borrowing that money unless you want to have this as part of your business plan, or using credit cards or the equity in your home. Plan how you're going to finance this. Again, we said, it could be 3 to 5 years till you really get this thing up and going. So do you have that? And consider what it will take to develop the markets and production procedures, particularly if you've got to hire some help along there. Again, you don't know what you don't know as to how much all this is going to cost. So do your homework before you make that first jar of jam to sell, what you might expect in the future. So, if you can't get this to work out on paper, there's not a lot of hope for when you're in full production and dealing with problems every day. So it's a matter of planning, and it's a matter of why I've said we're going to talk about, are you a foodie entrepreneur first? So with that, I'm going to stop and take a breather here. I can't really see any of the questions. Kim, are there anything we need to talk about before we start on the second half?
Right now, we don't have any chat box items, but I'll just remind everyone, the lower right part of your screen, there is a chat box. If you have questions, please send them to all participants, and we can be sure to get those questions over to Ginger. So we'll just wait a minute or two to see if anyone has a question, and then Ginger will get started again.
Yeah, and while we're waiting, I don't mean to be negative in the presentation when I challenge you with these questions. I do mean to put them out there and for you to give it some serious thought. You know, there's a lot of specialty products. We see a real surge in value-added and local production. So it's happening. There are people enthused. There's great products out there. But just beware that this is a business and that you are going to have to, you know, follow some business acumens along the way.
At this point in time, Ginger, we don't have any questions. Just a hello from Miss Leslie Hart.
And hello back, Leslie. Glad you could join us today. Okay, now I want to change gears a little bit and start actually kind of doing the roadmap of how to start a specialty food business in Maryland. I'm going to walk through several of the steps, and we're going to have a map at the end that shows these steps. Again, Extension, University of Maryland Extension offers some daytime programs, a Food for Profit course that actually dives into this in more detail. We have the health department come in, some specialty producers come in, we work through marketing plans. So that's a real training day. Today we're talking more about, these are the steps you've got to have in line to decide whether it's a go, no-go decision for you to start down this road of developing and producing and finally marketing your specialty foods. And the first one, of course, is product. Do you have a marketable product? Developing the prototype and testing it out and getting some feedback. Oftentimes, we're so close to our products ourselves that we don't see perhaps that there's separation in the jar, or that the packaging doesn't really show off the best attributes of that. We have to develop some the market form. Are we selling, shelf life? Or are you fresh or frozen? Again, all of these forms have positive attributes, but can be negative too. Is it something that you've got to keep cold, or is it something that can be sealed in packaging and baggage that have a longer shelf life? You're going to need to determine how to work with what we call a process authority. That's part of the regulatory chain where the way you make an item has to be to meet certain standards and regulations. This often applies to acidified foods, pickles, any kind of preserved product would have to go through that. Again, back to your market research and your regulatory research to see if your product falls under that. The other thing is batch size. When you make your product, are we talking about doing it in a 5-gallon kettle, or are we talking about doing it in a 25-gallon kettle? Or what is the batch size? And that cost of production. Certainly, the larger the batch, oftentimes we lower the per unit cost, but it's whether your product it can be done in a large batch. Perhaps what you're doing is small and unique and is best done in smaller batches. It will also drive some of your cost up. So I always ask people to really tell me what their product is. And when you're working with, do you have a marketable product? Back to that question of why would someone purchase this? Who is that customer? Because you're designing the product to meet their need, their want, their ability to use it to make that sale. So having the marketable product is the very first step. And again, because you may like the product, can we get others as well? And so working out that prototype is very important. And I do think this the presentation is going to be downloaded. So for each of the slides where I have a step, we're also going to have some resources along the way.
Ginger, we have a question from Mary. She wanted to know if you have some market testing strategies.
Well, first of all, probably family, friends, and fools are the first place you go with this stuff, and get some feedback there. One of the things we've often told folks is that farmers markets, if you have a product that's already produced, is a good place to test it. if you're in your workplace, samples, any place where you can get feedback about not just the product, but the package and the price. Ask folks what they were willing to pay for that. You might be surprised because they're going to compare it always to something they already know. And if it's not something they already know, you really need to explain to them what it is and why it's there. And Kim, I'm going to tell you that when I advance the next slide, I lost the regulations page out of here. I'm hoping that when folks get the recording of this in the PDF, we do have some links for things about processing and selling value-added foods in Maryland, the Cottage Food Law, and the food processing. There will be resources for each of the next 4 slides that I have. Doesn't seem it came through on the setup. But and if anyone wants those and doesn't get them through the recording, I'm happy to send you a copy of this presentation as well. When do you need a license? I'm just catching it real quick here. A sampling license you're going to have to get through your county Department of Health. And each county has a different regulation. Some cost more than others. Some will not let you sample a product that's not already processed and approved. So it's hard to get too far ahead if you don't have a product that's already being made. When I talk about sampling, it's one thing to get it to the public, but we all, work with family, friends, associates at work. You can use them as your sample group, and sometimes they're the most honest. Having some kind of business plan, and the first one here is to write the business plan. Actually, to write a business plan that works as your roadmap. There are several, again, resources available on the Maryland Rural Enterprise Development site and some other sites that will help you walk through a specialty foods business. There's lots of things on the internet now, particularly from the Small Business Administration, that has samples of food business plans. When I start to work a plan with someone, I usually, because it seems so overwhelming, I ask them to write only 2 parts first. I ask them to write out their business plan for their product. What is it? How are they going to make it? And their marketing plan, where they're going to sell it and how much they're going to charge for it. If you can do those 2 pieces first, the questions about finance, human resources, mission, all that will become much clearer if you can delineate in a business plan, what is your product, how are you making it, where are you selling it, what are you charging for it. That comes, that will, again, raise the questions. You don't know what you don't know. When you start to work through that, you may realize that you're not sure the batch size, you're not sure of whether the preservation of this works the way you need it done, whether the size of the brownies you're cutting is appropriate for the package. These things all come up when you start working through those 2 pieces of a business plan, and they'll guide you to what else you need. If you're going to be in the food business, you certainly need to consider liability insurance. It can be, again, one of those things that seems like an added cost, but if you put your name on a product, you can be liable if it causes someone to be ill. So there are companies out there, a number of them, that do food liability insurance. If you have a farm and you're making product to take off the farm, you will need additional liability insurance for what leaves your farming operation. Again, you can talk to your current carrier for your liability insurance, but that specialty food group, that slide I showed earlier on, has some resources. There are also some companies such as the Hartford company that has liability insurance for food. again, need to look at that. It's one of those things that as you start to develop product in that list of market research, you're going to start flushing out some of the things, the items of cost and liability insurance, product ingredients, product packaging, the time of marketing, that you're going to keep a list as you work through that, developing that plan of how much is this going to cost. So it goes back to that, are you a food entrepreneur that's willing to invest some of the financial resources it's going to take to get this launched? You'll certainly need to form this as a business, and you'll see the types there. Most of what we start with are sole proprietors, but you may, again, if you're an existing business and want to start this as that income patch, you may actually want to do this as a corporation on the side. You can get advice from your accountant. You can check online. The Office of Taxation and Assessments in Maryland has a lot of details what it takes to form a business. I will caution you to really get your ideas of what type of business you want, what you're going to make before you file anything with the state. Once you form a corporation or a partnership or an LLC, these are legal entities, and it's not something you can just drop. So this is something you're going to need to do, particularly if you're going to open a bank account under the name of the company. Many banks now are asking for your state business number, and you get that by filing as a business with the state in Maryland to get that account opened. And again, back to, are you a food entrepreneur? Are we going to make this a business, or are you going to work everything out of your personal checking account? That's not a business, that's a hobby. So let's get back to looking at how do we form this as a business. Registering your business with the state, and then, those assistance for business resources. Certainly Extension and local economic development organizations. We chatted a little bit here with Leslie Hart when she signed on. Leslie is an ag marketing professional, works in Washington County, that helps businesses such as small business enterprises, specialty foods, on-farm businesses work through the business process. And there are Kim, who is in Prince George's County, does the same thing. There are people out there. If you are looking for a business assistance resource, you can contact me or Kim, and we can direct you to who in the state might be that person to help you get started there. Labels. It seems like labels would just be this little insignificant part on the side, but I put this in here because we buy food with our eyes. And one of the first things you'll do is either see the glow of the product, or you'll be captured by the label that's on that product. It may be, certainly has to decide on the name and the storage information and all that good stuff, but it's also the look. We're being attracted to some of these products. I had Huckles on the beginning. Another label that I really like is a fermented food called Sweet Farm. They've redesigned their label. You can get out again and go to the farmers markets and look at the value-added products that have a unique packaging or label that certainly has to carry the information of the name and what it's made with, and whether you refrigerate or the size. And there's a whole list of requirements for your label, and that's, again, you can get that from the health department, even right down to the font size and the address. But consider putting some investment into your label, having perhaps some companies run a couple different designs for you. Put them up on the refrigerator and see what strikes people. But a label can make a big difference, and it's one of those things you may want to invest a little money in to get some color on that label and to be somewhat unique. Now, I do have a note there about making health claims. You cannot put a health claim on your product that can't be substantiated. You can't say that Ginger's pasture-raised chickens are the most nutritional chickens in the world. That's not allowed. But obviously, if you can't substantiate it, you can't put it on your label. Again, FDA has some regulations. If you go to their website, you can open up the page there, and it will talk all about label claims, what you can and can't do. Whether you decide to invest in a barcode, barcoding, I have a website there where you can get barcodes. There are some companies that will do barcodes a little cheaper than this website, but they are often not totally workable, or you may only get 10 and have to drop back to get some others. The website council there is the official barcode place. Again, knowing that you may at some time have to invest in a barcode. You know, when Wegmans picks up your product and starts putting them on your shelf, you're going to have to get a barcode. But it may not be something you'll need right away. Again, this label design, whether you want to spend that money early on, I wouldn't advise you to get 50,000 labels made right away of anything. So get an attractive label, get what you need on there now. Know that maybe in the future you're going to need a barcode at some point, but push comes to shove, you can get the barcode and add that to the label later. Just know what you need. Again, you don't know what you don't know till you start to research some of this. So again, the label is so important. So we have the product development, we have your business, we're looking at labels, and then certainly production and marketing. This is where most people really want to start because it's kind of the fun, exciting part, but it's often the place where you get really bogged down with how do I do it, what are the license and training and all that. And it is the exciting step, but it's also, again, part of the planning. When I said when you do your business plan, work out your product first because it will help you understand where do I have to get this made, what kind of training and license do I need. And again, I'll reiterate that it seems like the licensing and regulations are somewhat onerous, but in reality, if they were impossible, we wouldn't have this surge in value-added and specialty foods that we're seeing all across the country. So work within the system you have, ask a lot of questions, but it can be done. Now, again, finding storage space for all this, when you start making it, again, when you think about, can I do this in my home? Well, regulations are going to say that all the ingredients and packaging material has to be kept separate from your home kitchen, or even if you're making this in a commercial kitchen like the Be More Kitchen in Baltimore, which is now an incubator kitchen, they actually have part of their package deal is that you have space to store these items because you will need to verify that they're someplace safe and dry and that they're yours. And again, then writing that marketing plan, working through where am I going to sell and how am I going to sell and where and when. Sometimes you'll just be, taking this product out yourself and getting it started. I worked with a gentleman who had a Venezuelan salsa that he started selling small batches in grocery stores, just local independent grocery stores, and Wegmans picked him up. And they wanted that salsa in 14 stores like the next month. He was not prepared for that kind of distribution and quantity. So he had to step back some. And again, start small, but do consider if this takes off, how would you do that? But I think another really good example, if you read much about Michelle's granola, which is based in Timonium, Maryland, Michelle's can be bought on Amazon, but if you read the story of how Michelle's granola gets started, it was small batch selling at farmers markets, and the progressive growth and design of package and product is one of those success stories, but it's come with a lot of hard work. And it's certainly a production schedule. This might sound like, oh, well, sure, I have a schedule. What I find is once people launch, they're trying to balance all the things they have to do in time. Are you going to produce 2 days a week? Are you going to produce 3? What happens in the other days? Again, your facility, maybe where you're going to rent or lease, you can only produce in the evenings or whatever time is going to be available for you. So again, this thing of planning and writing down and working out the map and working out the pieces of the plan, trying to figure out ahead of time, I don't know how to do this, or I'm not sure how to handle that, getting an answer to that before you're pressed for time. One of the great things about, I think, a marketing plan, a business plan as a whole, is that it helps you avoid making snap decisions in the heat of the moment. If you have a plan of how you're going to get things done, how you would scale up, what your price is going to be so that you know your profit margin. When someone approaches you to do something different, maybe a larger volume or a wholesale account, you have in mind whether you can do that as far as your abilities, whether you can do a wholesale price based on knowing what you're making per item now. So again, a lot of planning and forework. We haven't turned out a single product yet, but we've done a lot of planning. And if you do that in advance, when you do get to production, it will be enjoyable. You will not have such an overwhelming push on you sometimes. So again, this is kind of a bunched up small slide, but again, if you get the presentation, it is kind of the step through what you need to know and where you need to go. Again, the website on the Maryland Rural Enterprise Development Center has a lot of this information. The Maryland Department of, I guess it's the Department of Health now, also they have a website that's a little difficult to navigate, but what you're going to be looking for is Food Processing Office when you do the Google search there that comes up with some of these regs. It often relates to what they call COMAR, which is a legal register in Maryland of food regulations. They don't make anything real easy to understand, so what I found is that if you don't understand, send them a question. We have a tendency in Maryland, I think, to title things a little bit hard to understand. For instance, if you're taking frozen foods to the farmers markets, you need a mobile farmers market license. Now, that sounds like you're riding it around in a truck from street to street. It is a license that's required to move frozen product through different market outlets. So sometimes titles can be confusing. Ask a lot of questions, and if you don't get the answer you need, certainly Extension can help, the Health Department can help, your local ag professionals, marketing that may be in your economic development office or in some of the land preservation offices where these folks are. But lots of questions to walk through. But again, when I talk to folks who have started the business and are now 5 years out, they're happy, they've got product to sell, and they're looking for what's next. This is a continually changing area with lots of opportunity, and so we would wish you the best and follow-up questions, and then finally we'll try to take any other questions you might have. Thank you, Kim, for putting some of those websites up. Again, we did have some resources listed here that did not come up on the pages, so I apologize for that. But happy to send you the form if anybody emails me their address. I'm happy to send you a copy.
That was wonderful, Ginger. I think you gave folks, really great insight into some of the steps involved in starting a specialty food business. And we do apologize for the mix-up with some of the slides. I just want to give folks an opportunity to comment and ask questions. If you guys could refer to the chat box, and this is a great time to ask Ginger any questions. And also, Ginger and I, as part of our work in terms of improving our teaching effectiveness, we have something in Extension called Teaching Effectiveness Forms. And if anyone is interested in completing one of those for Ginger, I also have a link to that in addition to the other resources that Ginger mentioned. So we'll give folks a few minutes to collect their questions. Ginger, we have another question from Leslie. Thank you, Leslie. She would like to know how you think the new FISMA regulations will affect the cottage food industry.
Well, first, Leslie, the cottage food industry, we're talking about a pretty narrow group of products. On my website at the MREDC is an article about what's been approved for that. So, you know, if we're talking jams and jellies, they're still on the list. Not acidified foods, maybe some of the other product, but outside the new FISMA, or I'm sorry, the Food Safety Modernization Act, as food producers and food entrepreneurs, all of us should be aware of the source of our products. You know, are you buying, if you're making salsa, and are you buying ingredients from a farm that is GAP certified? They're going to need that under the new Food Safety Modernization Act, or at least has a program for food safety. If you're sourcing products from ingredients from other states or online ingredients, do we have verification of what's in them exactly? Are these folks, I mean, some of the small farms are not going to fall under the regs, but even there, you need to know that how these folks handle the products. I said about those young gentlemen at Huckles that were getting the products from the urban farms. They have gotten big enough now that they are coming out to work with farmers in some of the surrounding counties of Baltimore. And one of the questions they do ask producers is like, let me see how how do you pick, wash, and store? You need to be aware of how product is being handled, and particularly stored. If it's going to be a lag time between the time you purchase particularly fresh items and use them. Now, if you're doing baking and you're doing dried fruits, you do need some labels. You do need some nutritional analysis on some of these things that are going in. From that standpoint, whether it's the Food Safety Modernization Act or any product you're bringing in that you didn't produce yourself, you need verification of safety of that product.
While we're waiting for other questions to come in, thank you, Taylor, for posting some of the resources for Women in Ag and also our social media handles. We really appreciate everyone for joining us today, and just want to remind you that you will get an email link to the recording. And also, be sure to check out some of our other webinars coming up. We mentioned a few earlier today. We have, again, resources for new and beginning farmers, food safety, and urban soil quality coming up, but we have a whole list on the website, I think, through December. So yeah, please check out those links that Taylor has entered into the chat box. Do we have any other questions? And if not, I think I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. Ginger and I can hang out for a few minutes in case there are any lingering questions. And we really appreciate everyone's participation today. And again, Ginger, thank you. This was very informative, and I think you gave everyone some great insight into what's involved with starting a specialty food business.
Well, thank you, Kim. And again, for those folks who did have additional questions or looking for resources, don't hesitate to either contact Kim or I, and we can, if we don't have an answer to your question, we usually know someone, the link to who does. So thank you again, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you all for your feedback. Take care.